It started like any other televised debate. Spotlights blazed, the crowd murmured, and the air pulsed with anticipation. Two politicians sat across from each other, worlds apart in background, belief, and everything in between. On the right, Senator JD Vance, conservative, sharp-tongued, raised on hardship, now wrapped in ideology. On the left, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, civil rights lawyer turned lawmaker, steady, brilliant, and unshakably calm. The moderator barely finished the first question before the tone was set. Economic policies, crime, national values, all touched, but none ignited, until one word entered the room. Race. JD Vance leaned in. He spoke of unity, of moving beyond the past, of personal responsibility. His words were polished, confident, but something about them felt dismissive, hollow, like a sermon built to ignore what people were actually living. Crockett didn't flinch. She sat still, eyes locked, waiting. Then he said it, not in a shout, but with a shrug. I think people are tired of hearing about systemic racism. It's not helping anyone anymore. The air shifted. The crowd stopped moving. The silence was brief, but loaded. Crockett's hand slowly lifted to adjust her mic. That small motion said more than 1,000 words. No one knew it yet, but a storm was coming. The question came halfway through the debate. What is your position on racial inequality in the justice system? The air changed, not drastically, but enough for the audience to shift slightly in their seats. Enough for the moderator to pause for half a breath longer. Enough to feel the edges of something sharp beneath the surface. JD Vance didn't hesitate. He leaned into the mic, his voice calm and clipped. Let's be honest, I think we've gone too far in making everything about race. The American justice system is not perfect, but it is not systematically racist. That idea, this notion that institutions are built to keep people of color down, is a dangerous and divisive narrative. It's just not supported by reality. He glanced at the audience as if expecting applause, and some came, hesitant but present. He continued, We've allowed ourselves to treat personal failure as a product of oppression. We've normalized the idea that being held accountable is somehow racist. That's not justice. That's reverse discrimination. The room remained quiet, but the tension was growing. Jasmine Crockett didn't interrupt. She didn't roll her eyes or shift in her seat. She sat still, eyes focused, lips pressed together, her expression unreadable. But inside her, something stirred. Not anger, not yet, but something close, something ancestral. The moderator turned to her. Congresswoman Crockett. She nodded once and began. There's a difference between accountability and injustice, she said calmly. When sentencing for the same crimes differs based on skin color, when neighborhoods are over-policed and underprotected, when access to legal defense depends on your zip code, not your guilt. That's not personal failure. That's systemic failure. She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. Her words hit with precision. I've defended too many young black men who were arrested for the same charges that white kids walk away from with warnings. That's not a story. That's not a narrative. That's a lived reality. One I've seen unfold day after day, courtroom after courtroom. JD Vance shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable, but tried to keep his composure. That's anecdotal, he said. We need to look at data, not emotions. Crockett didn't blink. We should. And when we do, we find that black Americans are incarcerated at nearly 5 times the rate of white Americans. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. She paused just long enough for it to sink in. That's what systemic means. It doesn't mean every judge is racist. It means the system we're in produces unequal outcomes, even when intentions might be neutral. Now the audience was leaning forward, Vance interjected. But what about personal responsibility? What about family breakdowns, education gaps? She raised her hand slightly, not to silence him, but to reclaim her space. Don't confuse cause and effect, she said. Generational inequality didn't start in the home, it started in policy, in redlining, in underfunded schools, in discriminatory policing. You can't preach responsibility while denying history. A few heads in the audience nodded. Some others crossed their arms. The moderator stepped in. Let's allow both sides to finish their points. JD Vance sat back, his jaw tight. Jasmine Crockett remained calm, but her presence was unmistakable, commanding not because she demanded attention, but because the truth she spoke refused to be ignored. The clash had begun, and it was only just warming up. JD Vance adjusted his posture and leaned back slightly, his voice taking on a tone of condescension masked in calm. You know what I think the real problem is? he said, looking directly at Crockett. We've created a culture where playing the victim is rewarded. We don't encourage resilience anymore. We reward grievance, and that's dangerous. The room shifted again. Slight coughs, the shuffling of jackets. The moderator blinked twice but said nothing. Vance continued, "Every time someone brings up race, it's like an automatic excuse. If you didn't get the job, blame racism. If you got pulled over, blame racism. If your neighborhood's struggling, it's the system's fault. At what point do we stop blaming everything on oppression and start owning our choices?" He spoke with the practiced smoothness of someone used to applause lines. But tonight, no one clapped. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on Vance, expression unreadable, but something had changed, something subtle. The jawline stiffened. Her shoulders squared. Her breathing slowed, deepened. She wasn't surprised, but she was ready. For a second it looked like she might speak, but instead she simply folded her hands in front of her and looked at the moderator. The room waited. The silence after Vance's statement wasn't the awkward kind. It was the kind of silence that comes before something irreversible. A moment holding its breath before the dam breaks. And yet Crockett still said nothing. She let the weight of his words fill the air like smoke. Toxic, thick, undeniable. The moderator glanced nervously between them. "Congresswoman, would you like to respond?" Crockett finally moved. Just a tilt of her head. Not defiance, not aggression. Something more composed, more controlled. "I'll respond," she said slowly. "When he's finished trying to lecture me on my experience." There was no applause, no gasp. Just that silence again. Now more alert, more aware. JD Vance leaned forward slightly, trying to take back the moment. "Congresswoman, I'm not lecturing. I'm pointing out that constantly framing yourself as oppressed—" Crockett interrupted, her voice still calm but sharper now. "You don't get to decide how I frame my life, Senator, especially when your framing comes from outside the lived experience you're trying to dismiss." That was the first real cut. It wasn't loud, but it sliced clean. Vance opened his mouth, but Crockett kept going, still poised. "You think talking about racism is an excuse. I think pretending it doesn't exist is a luxury. One that people who look like you have had for generations." Now the audience stirred. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "But let's be clear. I'm not here to make you comfortable, Senator. I'm not here to match your tone or to reassure you that your version of America is the only valid one." She leaned back slightly. "I'm here to tell the truth. And if the truth feels like victimhood to you, maybe it says more about your perception than my reality." It landed. Not like thunder, but like a tremor. The kind that signals a quake is coming. Vance looked momentarily stunned, then attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sounds like we're getting emotional now," he said almost dismissively. Crockett didn't flinch. She just looked at him, dead in the eye. "I'm not emotional. I'm just not afraid." That was it. The temperature in the room changed completely, and the clash had officially arrived. JD Vance's jaw twitched. He had lost control of the flow. And he knew it. The audience wasn't clapping. The moderator was watching Jasmine Crockett, not him. And that last line, "I'm not afraid," had landed harder than anything he'd said all night. He leaned forward, shoulders tense, voice dropping half a register. "You see?" he said, forcing a chuckle. "This is what happens. You try to have a serious conversation, and it turns into a feelings fest. You try to speak truth, and you get attacked for not being sensitive enough." His hand waved slightly in her direction. Careless, impatient. "Just calm down, girl. Seriously." Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't fade. It spreads. A collective intake of breath. Eyebrows raised, heads turning. Even the moderator froze. JD Vance didn't realize it at first. Not right away. Maybe he thought it was just another jab. Provocative, yes, but harmless. But this time, it wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. The word girl hung in the air like smoke from a sudden fire. Visible, choking, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't just dismissive. It was belittling, condescending, racialized. The audience didn't gasp. That would have been too theatrical. Instead, they went silent in the most deafening way possible. The kind of silence that fills your ears and tightens your chest. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Her face didn't change, not at first. She didn't react the way he expected. She didn't look shocked or insulted or furious. She looked still, but not silent. Her stare was direct, focused, and heavy. The kind of heavy that carries more than a moment. It carried history, grief, generations of being told to sit down, calm down, know your place. She hadn't moved an inch, but somehow she was towering. The moderator glanced her way, lips slightly parted, as if to say something, then thought better of it. The room was frozen. For a moment, time bent. No one checked their phones. No one blinked. The tension was not theatrical anymore. It was personal, unmistakable, alive. JD Vance, sensing the shift too late, tried to backpedal with a half smile. "I didn't mean," he started, but Crockett held up one hand. Not in anger, not to silence, but with the grace of someone reclaiming space that had just been stolen. And yet she still didn't speak. She simply nodded once, slowly, as if filing the moment away. And in doing so, she turned a throwaway insult into a moment no one could throw away. It wasn't just a slip, it was a rupture. The dam had cracked, and everyone knew. The flood was coming. The silence still hung in the room when Jasmine Crockett finally leaned forward. Not to lash out, not to match his tone, but to speak, not for herself alone, but for every voice that had ever been told to lower itself in the presence of power. Her tone was measured, controlled, but there was fire beneath the calm. "Senator Vance," she began, her voice as clear as glass. "I've been called many things in my life. Lawyer, congresswoman, advocate. But I've also been called girl in rooms like this, by men like you." She paused. "But let's be clear. I am not your girl. I'm not here to make you comfortable, and I won't shrink myself to fit inside your version of civility." The room didn't move. She continued slower now, not for drama, but for clarity. "You see, when you say calm down, girl, what you're really saying is be quiet. You're saying, don't challenge me, don't stand up, don't make me uncomfortable with your presence. You're not just talking to me, you're talking to every black woman who's ever walked into a room and been told, by tone, by glance, by condescension, that she's too loud, too angry, too much." She looked at him then. Really looked. Not with contempt, but with something heavier. Truth. "I don't owe you my silence. I don't owe you my stillness. What I owe is to the people I represent. And they didn't send me here to sit quietly while someone rewrites reality." There were no interruptions. Even JD Vance remained silent now. Crockett went on. "You see, I don't raise my voice because I don't have to. Truth carries its own volume. I don't shout because shouting is what you expect. I speak clearly because the facts speak loud enough." Her voice dropped just slightly. And the fact is, Senator, when you use language like that, you don't just insult me. You reveal yourself. You show a version of America where respect is selective and equality is conditional. And that's the version I've spent my life standing against." Another pause. The kind of pause that doesn't ask for attention. It demands it. "I come from a long line of women who were told to calm down, women who were told to know their place. But they built that place. They built communities, movements, a nation." She leaned in slightly now. "So no, I will not calm down. I will not sit down. I will not pretend that what you said was harmless. Because I know better. We all know better." Now the audience had stopped breathing. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't preaching, but she was commanding the room. With history, with dignity, with truth. She sat back then, letting her words settle like dust after a storm. And in that quiet, a truth became undeniable. She hadn't responded with rage. She had responded with legacy. It didn't take long. Within minutes of the broadcast, clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm but powerful response were being clipped, captioned, and shared across every major platform. Twitter, or X as it was now called, lit up like a wildfire. "Not Your Girl" began trending within the hour. Then came Knocker Crockett clapback, then Suckers She Did Not Sit Down, and finally, simply, Jasmine. It was everywhere. The 48-second clip, from JD Vance's "Calm Down, Girl" to Crockett's closing line, had been shared millions of times before the East Coast had even gone to sleep. Instagram Reels stitched it with powerful music. TikTok creators added commentary. Reaction videos filled YouTube. It was no longer just a moment. It was a movement. And it wasn't just activists or progressive voices. People who didn't follow politics were sharing it. Mothers, teachers, students, black women who had never seen someone hold their ground so elegantly under pressure. Young girls posting, "This is what power looks like." Lawyers saying, "She spoke for every courtroom we've ever been dismissed in." Celebrities chimed in. Actress Viola Davis reposted the clip with the caption, "Grace under fire, strength without rage." Writer Roxane Gay tweeted, "This is how you carry history and dignity into a room, no apologies." Even Beyoncé's official fan page posted, "That's Queen energy." In Washington, the reaction was swift. Progressive lawmakers rallied around Crockett. Representative Ayanna Pressley tweeted, "This is what courage looks like." Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wrote, "Jasmine didn't just respond, she redefined the moment." Senator Cory Booker called her speech a masterclass in truth-telling. Even some moderate Republicans were caught off guard. A few called JD Vance's comment regrettable. One conservative analyst admitted on live TV he underestimated her, and she made sure he wouldn't forget it. News anchors played the clip on loop. Morning shows invited analysts to break it down frame by frame. One headline read, "Crockett versus Vance, the moment that stopped the room and started a conversation." But it wasn't just talk. Her campaign donation page, which had seen modest activity, exploded overnight. Grassroots contributions poured in from across the country, small dollar donors, first-time givers. One message read, "I don't live in Texas, but I want her to keep speaking." Crockett herself remained quiet in the hours after. No tweet, no post, just silence. And that made the moment echo even louder. Because this wasn't about spin, it wasn't a media stunt. It was real. And it had tapped into something long buried but always present. The exhaustion of being dismissed and the power of finally being heard. It wasn't just what she said, it was how the room changed afterward. JD Vance, who had spent the first half of the debate commanding the conversation, now sat back in his chair, noticeably quieter, less certain. The edge in his tone had dulled. His posture shifted from dominance to discomfort. And across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her volume or take up more space. She simply was. Present, rooted, undeniable. The moderator, once pressed to keep time, now gave her space. Questions that were tossed like tennis balls earlier in the night were now handed to her with something closer to respect. Deference, even. Crockett responded with the same measured confidence. She didn't gloat. She didn't spike the moment. She simply answered firmly, clearly, with the composure of someone who had already said what needed to be said and knew it had landed. The debate continued, technically, but the energy had changed. It wasn't about policy bullet points anymore. It wasn't about campaign strategies or talking over each other. Now it was about presence. And Crockett's presence was the gravity holding the room together. Audience members weren't just reacting to words anymore. They were reacting to the weight of what had happened. Some leaned forward, some simply sat still, watching her with quiet reverence. Even those who didn't agree politically couldn't deny something had shifted. JD Vance tried once or twice to reclaim footing. A joke, a fact check, but it fell flat. The audience had moved on, not from the debate, but from him. Because what Crockett had done wasn't about defeating an opponent. It was about dismantling the script. She had rewritten what strength looked like on that stage. Without shouting, without posturing, without force. Just truth. And from that moment on, the debate no longer belonged to the man who raised his voice, but to the woman who refused to lower hers. By the time the debate wrapped up, the audience was no longer watching a political event. They were witnessing a shift. What began as a panel discussion had turned into a cultural reckoning, not through shouting, not through scandal, but through a quiet refusal to accept the unacceptable. JD Vance had entered the room expecting to dominate the conversation. He left having learned that power, when unchecked, can be silenced, not by louder voices, but by clearer ones. And Jasmine Crockett? She hadn't come to win the debate. She didn't need to. What she did was far more enduring. She stood still in the face of condescension and turned it into clarity. She didn't humiliate her opponent. She revealed him. Not by attacking, but by holding up a mirror. A mirror many weren't ready to look into, but couldn't ignore once it was there. That's why the moment didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Because it wasn't just about what happened in the room. It was about what the room represented. For every woman who's been told to stay quiet. For every person of color who's been told they're too sensitive. For every voice that's been talked over, dismissed, or told to sit down, Jasmine Crockett stood up. And in doing so, she didn't just speak back, she shifted the balance. The debate had rules, but she changed the story. And perhaps that's the true victory. Not in how many votes are won, not in which side speaks longer, but in who leaves behind a moment that echoes beyond the night. So now the question lingers. Was this just one clash in one debate? Or was it the beginning of something larger? A shift in what we tolerate, a change in how we listen, a redefinition of what strength looks like, especially when it comes from those who are too often told they don't belong. That's for us to decide. But one thing is clear. Jasmine Crockett didn't just refuse to sit down. She made standing up unforgettable. There's something powerful about watching someone take a stand. Not with fists, not with fury, but with truth. Jasmine Crockett didn't dominate the stage that night by being the loudest. She didn't win applause through aggression or spectacle. She won hearts by staying grounded in who she was and refusing to flinch when everything in the room tried to make her small. That's the lesson here. In a world where shouting often gets the spotlight, it's easy to forget that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it speaks calmly, but firmly. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting still, locking eyes with someone who tried to dismiss her, and simply saying, "No. No, I will not shrink. No, I will not be silenced. No, I will not accept a version of justice that only works for some." Moments like this matter, not just because they go viral, but because they validate something many of us have felt but couldn't always name. The exhaustion of being underestimated and the power of being unapologetically present. To every girl who's been talked over, to every black woman who's been labeled angry for being honest, to every person who's been told they don't belong in the room, you do, and your voice matters. What Crockett did was more than political. It was personal. It was cultural. It was a reminder that civility is not the absence of conflict. It's how we choose to hold our ground within it. So, let this be more than a moment. Let it be a wake-up call. Let it be a push to speak up, not just when it's easy, but when it's necessary. Let it inspire us to listen more closely, especially to the voices that have been ignored for too long. And if you're watching this, feeling something stir inside you, let that be your cue. Stand up. Speak out. Protect the truth. Because strength is not in silence, it's in standing, even when the room wants you to sit.